Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Change the Shift podcast, where nursing meets the internet. The goal of this podcast is to solve problems, review topics, and share actionable information that encompasses the professional and personal lives of healthcare professionals and nurses. Please subscribe, download, and listen while we discuss current events, impactful stories, and invaluable lessons for the front line of healthcare. I am your host, Sean. Welcome to the show. This is going to be a very unique show this evening. We have a discussion panel. If you've noticed, the title of the episode is Men in Nursing, where we talk about disparities. This particular episode was spawned and motivated by a conversation that happened about 4 days ago on Twitter. Let me start by introducing my guests here. Or, I have a better idea. We're going to let them introduce themselves. We're going to start from the top, and you're going to give us a quick 5-minute rundown of who you are, where you're located in the United States, and tell us a little bit about your nursing background. Why don't we start with Craig, whose Twitter handle is KeepItRealRN. Take it away, Craig.
Okay, well, my name is Craig, and I am located in Minnesota. And if I told you exactly what city I'm in, it would be very hard to guess where I worked, because there's only one game in town. So anyway, yeah, I have been a critical care nurse it's kind of frightening to think about it, but coming up next June, will be 30 years. Awesome. And my career started in Minneapolis, and after graduation, and I went to California, went to San Diego, and lived there for a couple of years.
Hey.
And then I met my wife out there, and we did some travel nursing together, and we did an assignment in Arizona. And we were going to do an assignment in Hawaii, and something fell through with that particular instance of going to Hawaii. We were supposed to work in an ICU, and they had changed it to working on a floor. And I was like, I'd really like to go to Hawaii, but I don't think I could tolerate working on a med-surg floor for 13 weeks. Thanks, but no thanks. If I had life to live over again, I kind of wish I would have pursued that one more time. But anyway, travel nursing ended up bringing us to South Florida, and I worked at JFK Medical Center down there for many, many, many years. And in 2006, between 2005 and 2006, we had a very active hurricane season down there. And real estate values had gone up quite a bit since we bought our house down there and everything. So all of that combined made us decide that we wanted to move somewhere a little bit further away from the ocean, because I went through 3 hurricanes in 2005, 2006, and didn't want to go through any more.
Awesome.
So we ended up here back in Minnesota. My parents lived about 3 hours north of where I am. So it was kind of nice that we could see, the family a little bit more, my kids could have.
Awesome. Thanks for being here tonight.
The parents.
Keith.
Thank you.
Nurse
Yes,
Keith
sir.
is your Twitter handle. Go ahead.
All right. So my name's Keith Carlson. I've been a nurse since 1996, and I've worked mostly in ambulatory care, hospice, home health, and public health. So I've worked really out in the community for almost 20 years now. And for about 5 years, I've been offering career coaching, what I call holistic career coaching, to nurses and healthcare professionals. That's at nursekeith.com. And so I focus mostly on the career coaching. I'm also the director of nursing and the chief nursing officer of a small home health agency in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And luckily it's still very small, and I can telecommute most of the time and only commute to work once a week. That'll change someday, and I'll have to step down because I'm not about to take on another full-time nursing job. So I recently started writing as the career blogger for nurse.com. I've been doing that for a couple months, and I write for a bunch of other websites about nursing and one nursing magazine. And I have my own blog, Digital Doorway. I've been writing for 10 years. So Sean, you and I started blogging as nurses a decade ago, which
sir.
it wasn't a very big nurse blogosphere back then, I've got to say.
No, it was not.
Pretty small.
Did I miss it? Did you mention your podcasts there, Keith?
Oh, well, yeah, I've been partners with Kevin Ross on RN FM radio for 4 years. We're about to celebrate our 4th anniversary. So it's one of the older nursing podcasts, and Elizabeth Scala just joined us as a fairly regular co-host a couple months ago. We had to get the female voice back into the podcast because it's just been us two guys for about 3 years after we lost our original co-host, Anna Morrison. And then I have the Nurse Keith Show. It airs about 3 times a month, and it's very specific, short podcasts, usually about 20 minutes long, with career issues. So it's pretty focused. RNFM radio is a little more far-ranging.
Yeah.
And,
welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
And last to round out the list is Twitter handle Men in Nursing, otherwise known as Robert. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to be on the show. I feel like I'm a dwarf among giants here. So I go by Men in Nursing. I also have the Twitter handle, Robert BSNRN. That's kind of my personal handle. I don't do much on that one, but I do a lot on this one. I kind of developed this page to kind of bring together men in nursing in the community, kind of develop relationships and kind of develop us as a community professionally and personally. So
Awesome.
I've been a nurse for 3.5 years now. I work as a cardiac progressive care nurse. Cardiac stroke. I deal with post-open heart. I used to work with LVADs. And now I got into nursing. I was in the military. I was in the Navy. And when I got out, I started working in security at a hospital, and I started working in the emergency room. And I was like, man, this is what I want to do right here. Nice. So I'm still working on that path. I'm actually looking probably in the fall to go back and do nurse practitioner. So,
well, that's a good segue. For those of you who don't know me, I am the host of this podcast, the Change of Shift podcast. My name is Sean. My Twitter handle, Sean P. Dent. I have been a nurse for 10 years. I've spent my entire nursing career in the ICU. Went back and pursued an advanced degree, and now I am a practicing acute care nurse practitioner in a level 2 trauma center. I work in the ICUs there. Nursing was, let's just say it was my second career. 10 years before that, I was a certified athletic trainer working with the high school population mostly. Like Keith said, I've been a nurse blogger for almost as long as I've been a nurse. Personal blog, mystrongmedicine.com, and most recently have taken some ventures into podcasting. This podcast is a couple months old. Started experimenting with podcasting over the summer and have fallen in love with it. So
pretty easy to do.
It really is. Yeah. It really is. Keith and I have had some conversations. I've had some conversations with some old bloggers, and I think that podcasting is going to be the new blogging platform. So once again, gentlemen, thank you for joining me on this episode. So we're going to jump right into this. So 4 or 5 days ago, Keith and I actually had a private conversation about a blog article that he's writing in regards to men in nursing, and I'm not going to divulge any more information beyond that because I don't believe that post has come out just yet. But
not yet.
We talked about a handful of topics. Some of those topics are about as stereotypical as you can get, and other topics were a little bit more interesting. Posted a tweet on Twitter that simply said something along the lines of, just had a conversation with Keith in regards to men in nursing, looking forward to it, and it was a very interesting snowball / domino effect between the current guests of this episode, and I think there was at least two other Twitter nurses out there that were joining in on the conversation. And I'm going to post the link to the Medscape article that Keith was referring to, which was sort of the reference for the conversation that went on. And this conversation, and for any of those who are out on Twitter, once a conversation starts, usually, you have an interesting, meaningful, and active conversation for a little while, and then it kind of fades away. And my Twitter on my phone was exploding for hours. and then it kind of died off a little bit, and then for some reason somebody started talking about it again, and I think someone accidentally or on purpose kept tagging the same people throughout the entire conversation. So it was actually quite entertaining and interesting, to say the least. So this particular post on Medscape had to do with a nurse salary report. And I went looking at it again this evening, and the men in nursing portion of it was actually a very small portion of it. But it sparked quite the passionate conversation amongst a couple men who are in the nursing field. Craig, Mr. Passionate, we're going to start with you first. So the first topic we're going to talk about here is men in nursing, and my post is my statement is women earn less than men. And I actually went back and looked at some of the Medscape references in regards to what they were using for reference material, and I found it interesting that all of the data that they acquired for this survey literally lasted a month. That was it. There was 8,000, almost 9,000 participants in this survey that only went out for about 5 weeks or so, and got one heck of a response. So the first subject at hand, and let's go one at a time, just giving our take on this, is talking about women earning less than men. And I know, Craig, you had stated that wasn't the case, at least in your experiences.
No, in my situation, or in my personal experience, my first job was at a union facility, and I think somebody else on Twitter mentioned this too, is that the salary ranges are public knowledge because they're part of a contract that it's publicly available. And it's based upon, number one, your educational level. So if you're an ADN, you're on one column. If you have a BSN, you're on another column. And by the way, a BSN maybe netted you about 75 cents or $1 an hour tops. But it was just based on, this is how many years of experience you are. This is, whether you're a staff nurse or they used to have assistant head nurses back then, and those were the hourly positions. And it was basically, this is how many years of experience we're going to give you credit for. There's the number that you get. And since they were union facilities, you really couldn't fudge on the years of experience. And that was kind of the way it was, even at most of the other non-union places that I was at, except for one. Now, when I went to South Florida, they did have some wiggle room in that area. They also had the grid that says your years of experience, and this is your salary range. But depending on what their situation was, if you were there filling a need that they needed filled yesterday, they were able to find some wiggle room on how many years of experience they would give you credit for. And in that situation, in talking to other nurses that came in various times of need and not need, that I found that the women that I talked to, and the ones that were willing to talk about it, were pretty good negotiators, had negotiated almost as good as, if not better, deals than some of the guys.
Okay. All right. Keith, what about you?
Well, I have not experienced it in my workplaces that I'm aware of. I have heard anecdotal reports from some nurses in my conversations as a coach, and then in, responses to the things I've written over time. So I hear it anecdotally, but I haven't seen numbers in my own experience as a nurse in the workplace. It's just that it's been intimated to me many times over the years, and a lot of that I think is filtered through the census data on what can't be argued is that women make about 78 cents on the dollar of men, in this country in general, sort of in the wider population. So, what I've read and what I've always hoped and what other people have written is that with nursing being, at this point 90% female, the hope would be nursing would be the one profession where there wouldn't be any disparities at all. So that's what everybody wants, and that's what everybody actually expects if you think about it. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. What about you, Rob?
Well, speaking from my own experience, again, as Keith was saying, and of course, that's no indicator of overall issue. The first facility I worked at, we had, it wasn't union, and from what I've heard, it's difficult to, I guess you could say it's difficult for new graduates to be confident to say, this is what I want to get paid. Mm-hmm. When I started, there were 70 spots and 1,200 applicants within the first hour of applying. And, having experience, work experience, volunteer experience, having a BSN, these things all gave you an upper hand. But once you actually got the offer for a job, you really didn't feel like, well, gosh, I have any room to negotiate, because they could just choose somebody else. Mm-hmm. And if you had an associate's degree, you were pretty much not going to get a job unless you had already worked at the facility for many years as a tech or something. The facility I work for now is union, and so as Craig was saying, there's it's upfront. There's no negotiation. I even tried negotiating because I didn't need this job that I moved to. It was just closer, more convenient to home. So I tried to be a little hardball. I tried to negotiate, and they said no. This is contract. This is what you're going to get paid. So I actually took a little bit of a pay cut to come to the place I'm at now. Yeah.
Okay.
But that's my experience.
So I've never worked for a union in my entire adult career, so it was interesting to hear. The union versus non-union topic came up. It was actually mentioned by a nurse named Lisa. She goes by As the Hospital Turns, or I think it's now, she's had a couple of different Twitter handles. The most recent one, I think, is Mom Me. It's like 3 M's. I can't remember what it is. Anyway, she's been a nurse for about 7 years. She was actually a guest on my podcast in the early weeks. She just has returned to school. She had a baby. And she's on vacation right now. So she's sunning in horrible Hawaii right now. So otherwise, she would have been here. So I was not aware that apparently that, as Craig and as Rob are saying, that your salaries get shared when it comes to union employment. So that was interesting to me, first of all. Right. In my personal experience, I've never, other than hearsay, private conversations like Keith, I've never really known other individuals' salaries. The only time that I knew other individual salaries was if I was in a supervisory or managerial position. And I've had a couple of those over the years. On a whole, I think in my personal experience, we get paid about the same. I know that a couple of the guests over there in the Twitter stream are talking about the differences between ADN, BSN, and differing pays depending on your degrees. Now that has been very different in multiple places I've worked, but on a whole, I must say that I guess the only thing I would think about is if we're talking about majority rules, first of all, women are the majority. And second of all, if women are the majority, then the majority of the senior nurses would without a lack of crunching numbers, would be women. So it's kind of surprising that the majority, by this particular survey, are saying that women are paid, even if it is a small percentage, whether it's 78 cents on the dollar or less, for there to be that big, for there to be a disparity, strikes me as interesting. So I know that I know Craig was very passionate about his personal experiences, and I have to fall back on the education that they forced on me as a nurse practitioner. And we have to keep in mind and take this survey with a grain of salt, that the survey itself doesn't hold a lot of clout when it comes to strength of evidence. And while we all would like to speak very passionately about our own personal experiences, our personal experiences can't be applied to the profession as a whole. So would everybody care to agree with that, or care to chime in on that one? Oh, come on,
I don't think we can generalize our own experiences to the nation.
I would agree.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't disagree that in the world at large that there's a disparity in pay, especially when it comes to jobs that are salaried jobs and jobs that are white collar jobs. But I got to believe that in nursing, like Sean was saying, because the majority of the people in upper management, the people that are making the salary decisions, are women. Are women discriminating against women just like men are? I mean, I find that hard to believe.
Right. Though, if you look at some of the, what you might call feminist literature over the years, that even women who have moved up in certain areas of influence, not necessarily in healthcare, but in other areas of industries or professions, they've actually seen it. I don't know if it's been quantified, but it's been reported and shown how women who've been kind of groomed in a patriarchal system will actually take on some of that, and it's referred to in the literature as internalized depression. And if we had Renee Thompson on here, I wish we had Renee here, because she's a specialist in nurse-to-nurse bullying, and there are opinions out there that some of that nurse-to-nurse bullying, some people feel, is some form of internalized depression from what some people would characterize as a patriarchal system. And you might see healthcare as a whole as a patriarchal system. So I just find it really interesting. And Beth Boynton, who's here in the chat, she's not on video here. She said that she can't give us any specifics. She said she's never seen any pay disparities in her experience, but for her, it's more issues of advancement. That she said what did she say here? No specifics off the top of my head. Subtle experiences of being dismissed or overlooked, hard to quantify. And I have had female nurses tell me that as well. And something I've noticed in quite a few of my workplaces, actually almost every workplace that I've been in over the years, the majority, the head nurses or the directors of nursing or the clinical directors have all been men, including at the agency where I work, where I was appointed as DOM. So even though every workplace I've worked at has only had a couple men, they're almost always headed by men, which is, I find, just interesting. And I'm one of those statistics, actually.
You guys still there?
Yeah,
I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah. My own
Looked like somebody froze there for a minute.
My own personal experience is that the facility I used to work at was all female supervisors, directors. Place I currently work is managers, the supervisors are all female except for the director is male. But I do feel like in my own experience, I and some of the other men that I've worked with have been approached, I probably would say more often than the women have, and encouraging us to seek out charge nurse, supervisory, managerial positions. So
Interesting. So in my experience, all of my managers have been women. In two instances, it was a man who was the supervisor, but he had either he was in transition going from one job to another. He wasn't really the permanent quote unquote supervisor or director. So I find that very interesting. But I guess the point of this conversation is that if women are truly in management positions, yet the women are apparently not getting paid the rates they should be getting paid, or they're getting paid a less percentage, is it on purpose? Is it by accident? Is there some sort of subconscious oppression, as Keith had pointed out, or is it consciously? I would like to maybe even spark another conversation in regards to we work in a profession that is very, and I don't know what other term to use, very cliquish. And maybe in the world of men, we can call it, the boys club, or you can call it the clique in, the world, the women's world. But every place that I've worked, if you're not inside the circle, you don't get inside the circle unless someone pulls you in, unless someone invites you in or wants you to come in. So if you're the newcomer, even if you've been there for years, in some instances, if you're not liked by the center circle, you never find that advancement. And we talked, Keith, you mentioned Renee. Renee was actually a guest on my show, like episode 3 or 4, and she talked about, bullying. She talked about the lateral violence, and she talked about how there are just some people out there that, and I hate to quote a movie, that just want to see the world burn. And that's all they want to do is just make people feel bad and want to see them not succeed in some way, shape, or form. And that's how burnout happens as quickly as it does, or that's how a lot of the newer nurses who think that, this is a wonderful profession with wide open spaces, and then they get there, someone they get under someone's thumb, and their views of our profession changes so greatly that they leave the profession, or at very least they leave a job or continue to leave jobs until they find a place that is inviting. So it's very interesting. I've posted a clip there earlier while you guys were discussing this topic. I'm trying to remember who the Twitter, who was on Twitter that mentioned or posted this, but he posted a video which I found interesting. I think it was, his Twitter handle is at Nursing Life, I think, and he posted this video. And it talked about how the disparities that this particular article that Medscape was talking about, the disparities in the pay, that those numbers are skewed, and that it has to do with percentage variations versus actual finite numbers. So I think it's like a 4-minute video. I watched it the day that we had this conversation was 4 days ago. I unfortunately didn't watch it again this evening to refresh my memory. So does anybody have any?
I remember watching that video. They discussed the rationale for why there was really a true disparity was women are more likely to leave the workforce for having children, more likely to go part-time, and therefore their overall amount of money they make in their lifetime is decreased because they're not on a trajectory to make money, to be consultants, to be managers, professionals. The mindset women are put into from an early age is to, well, you'll work and you'll maybe work part-time, but your real other side job is to also care for the children. And
That's
so his argument was that we should encourage men to be more involved in the household, in the raising of children, and women should be more inclined to being okay with having a professional trajectory.
Right.
Well, don't you think that actually is going on right now? I mean, here we go again. We're skewed again. In my personal experience, many of the men are contributing more to the household now more than ever.
Yeah.
That might change the data over the years. Yeah, I was just looking at the Huffington Post article from, let me see, March 24th, 2015, and they were talking about the Journal of the American Medical Association article that posted the disparities in pay between men and women, and they did say that there were some problems with the data set that they saw. One was that even though men were out earning women in across specialties, they realized there were many aspects that weren't taken into consideration during the study, during the JAMA study, because they said about half of the gap was accounted for by employment and other measured characteristics. This gap is similar in magnitude to the salary differences found for physicians, but they said it was limited by survey data and also some of these other salary issues that Craig brought up during our tweet chat the other day. You know, those same issues of, you know, do men work longer hours? Do men take more of those double shifts? And there have been some conversations in some of these articles about whether that was taken into consideration enough or if it wasn't taken into consideration enough. So it's will need to be repeated for a longer time for us to really know, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that was the argument that Craig and I were both making, was that we felt that there was limitations to the study where they weren't discussing hourly wage. It was just more the annual wage. And I think both of us were kind of feeling that, well, you know, if men stereotypically work more hours, work more overtime, we'll work the holidays, we'll work the weekends, would obviously be making more annually than somebody who doesn't. So do
you, Craig, do you feel that we are stereotyped as working more or picking up more of the overtime and working the holidays and working the weekends?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I would call it stereotyping, but I would say that, again, and I can only reflect on my own personal experiences, is that, you know, if you look at the schedule in the unit, you will see that the overwhelming majority of the part-timers are women, whereas most of the guys are full-timers, and you'll see more men working overtime shifts and working extra shifts and that kind of thing, especially if they have a family.
Yeah. My own experience looking at, I follow a little over 600 men in nursing on my page, and my own experience reading people's profiles and every day their posts, looking at how often they work. They're always talking about working 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week, maybe one or two jobs. That's not uncommon for me to see that on a daily basis, talking about shift 1 of 7 this week, or it's not uncommon.
What about you, Keith? Do you find that men are working more the extra than women?
Not necessarily. I mean, when I look at the clients I work with, because I work directly with female and male clients in my coaching practice, many of them feel overworked and many of them work very, very long hours. So I can't really say that the men seem to be working more than the women. I think that's true in some places, and I think it might be more true in some of those acute care scenarios that you all are referring to, rather than maybe the ambulatory care practices. So I think that might be true. And yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I'm thinking out loud because you're talking about ambulatory versus acute care. I'm wondering if those data points that we're referring to took into account hospital-based employment versus the traditional Monday through Friday job, or taking into account the we call them weekenders here, where they work a full-time position, but they squeeze it all in 3 days. I wonder if they took that into consideration.
Yeah, it's so multifaceted. And like Beth Boynton's pointing out in the course of the conversation in the chat room, that there are issues facing women in the society that are very complex, that we can't really boil them down to like one small talking point. And actually, I just want to point out that Beth just wrote in the chat room, I'd be curious as a female nurse to know what you guys feel are challenges that you face because you are men in nursing. And that's part of what I interviewed you about, Sean, for that piece I'm writing, and that's a lot of what I wrote in that piece that isn't coming out yet, and I can't say who's publishing it, but we could talk about the biases against male nurses that we've all experienced, because those are disparities too, and there's a whole lot to say about that too, and we could beat the salary thing to death, but I think there's a lot to say about what men experience in nursing.
Yeah. I mean, but we're talking personal experiences still here. In my personal experience, the women work way more overtime, way more holidays, and way more weekends than any of the men I work with. And I've worked in nothing but acute care and critical care and ER, where if we're going to talk about percentages, the male nurse, their place of employment is a higher percentage in those, what do they call it, the higher octane, higher stress leveled positions. And once again, the irony being is, and I've worked in the really small hospital, and I've worked in the metropolitan hospital where you have 15 floors. And in my personal experience, it's been the female nurses who volunteer that'll work 7, 8, 9, 10 shifts in a row and pick up the extra time. And then they worked a 16-hour and they get called 4 hours into their sleep. Hey, can you come back in 8 hours and work another 4? Sure, I'll be in, and I wonder if, in my experience, because most of the women I work with are supporting families. So I'm wondering if they're doing it to have that extra spending money for their children. I mean, I don't know if the men who I have worked with, I think it's split down the middle, who are family men versus the single men. And the family men definitely are making the money for their family, but the single men have other motivations for earning their extra money.
Dating is expensive.
Yes. Dating is expensive.
Beth just said that women have a harder time saying no in general, and she relates it to self-esteem issues. And I found that in my coaching practice. I do agree to some extent around the boundaries of being able to say no. Yeah.
I also think that the ability to say no has everything to do with how long you've been a nurse.
Mm-hmm. I have no problem with it.
Exactly. Hey, that's my whole point.
No way.
Those first 3 to 4 years, 3 years-ish, right around the 3-year mark, it was, you know what, can you work that extra shift? Can you stay the extra 4 hours? And it used to be the guilt-ridden, okay, I'll stay. I feel bad for my coworker. Now It's, I don't want the door. I can't get out of the door fast enough.
Yeah.
So I finally, it took a long time to adopt the concept that nursing is a 24-hour job. It doesn't matter how long I stay here. The job is really never done. So,
that's right. And it's interesting. I've read some studies and I've written about it a little bit. There's stuff being written about it now that there are generational differences, that if you look at what they call the Eisenhower or the silent generation, those nurses who are, in their 60s, 70s, they're the ones who will just kind of tuck their head down and go for it and just work however many shifts they're asked to. And as you move forward to the millennial generation, the millennials are much more clear about, no, I'm not working, I'm going out partying tonight. So the millennials have been, somehow they've learned that they can have work-life balance, that it's really okay. So.
I ironically, since we're on the subject, I talked to Renee Thompson, and I don't know if Rob and Craig, you know who Renee Thompson is, but you should really look her up if you don't. She's an amazing nurse and an amazing speaker, very, very, very knowledgeable about her subject matter. And we got off on a tangent in regards to the paradigm shift in the profession currently. Is that when I started, it was still it was the fear mongering that when you started, those who were in charge and those who have been there before you, whatever they said goes. I still worked in an area where, what the doctor said was law, and that when the doctor showed up on the unit, everybody scattered. Here, doctor, you can have my chair. Here, doctor, have this computer to do your work, and now the current millennial generation are standing up for themselves because that's the way that their generation has been, brought up or at least educated. And I think it's awesome. But I think seasoned nurses who have been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years get offended by that. Like, you need to earn your wings there, whippersnapper. How dare you speak back to me kind of attitude. So it's wonderful to see it happening in real time. It's not really fun to be a part of it. I don't know if anybody else has experienced that on either end of that pole.
Interesting. It was interesting you brought that up because this is going to make me sound like a dinosaur when I say this. But when I started my very first job in nursing, and I was on orientation. I was sitting in the patient's room. I had my little bedside table there with my flow sheet and all that. And I'm charting away, and a cardiologist walks in the room, asks the patient how he's doing, asks me a couple questions, and leaves. A couple days later, I get called into the nurse manager's office. Somebody had written me up because I did not stand up when that cardiologist entered the room. Mm-hmm. I kid you not. I got officially written up for that.
Yeah. Oh, if we're going to tell war stories, I did get written up for that. Yeah, that happened to me in a smaller hospital. And that only happened about 5-6 years ago. That, the small hospital in Podunk, USA was adopting the electronic medical record, and it was the first year. So they didn't realize they needed as many terminals as they would in the ICU unit, because you need a terminal not only for the doctors, but you need terminals for the nurses. And I was actually yelled at by a doctor, and I'm not talking like, "Excuse me, can you get up?" I mean, red face screaming to get out of her chair. Yes, her chair.
Okay. Her chair.
And then, because I refused to get out of her chair because I was doing my job, she reported me to the supervisor on duty, and the supervisor on duty had to report me to my manager. Now, nothing came about it, but the fact that she felt the need to report me for disobeying her, I guess,
insubordination.
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 It blew my mind. So
right.
It's part of the reason why I do what I do when I blog the way I blog and the podcasting I do, because I refuse to let other nurses feel that way.
Right.
So, sorry on my soapbox, gentlemen.
No, it's an awesome soapbox. And can I make a point?
Absolutely.
We're talking about, you were saying how this was a female doctor reacting to you. And something I've really been interested the last few years, but haven't really explored it at all, is as the number of female physicians rises, so we're getting over 50%, I think, or heading towards 50% of physicians being female somewhere. I mean,
it's like 39 or 40.
Right.
Yeah.
It's in the 40s, I think, now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested in the dynamics that will happen over the coming, 10 years, 20 years, when you have a higher number of male nurses, a higher number of female doctors, and there are power dynamics between physicians and nurses, right? So I'm interested to see what will happen as the gender differences in those two professions begins to shift and change. Like, what will the dynamics be like? I'm just very interested in it. I have no opinion about it. I just find it kind of a fascinating thing to think about.
Oh, I could talk ad nauseum. Anyone want to go first on this one?
Well, I want to bring it. This kind of ties in with something that you mentioned about clicks and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess we can use it as a segue in there. But I have worked in my particular unit and worked with various mixes of people where you've had, half and half men, half women, maybe 3/4 women and 1/4 men. And then we've had shifts where it's been like 99% men or completely all men, all male staff. And women will comment about how much less stress there is in the unit when the majority of the people in there are men. And I can tell you, I think the reason for that is men have the ability to work together, but they don't have to like each other.
Oh.
Whereas women blur the work and their personal life kind of intersect, and there's this huge gray area between their work and their personal life. It's like, I can work next to Sean and I don't necessarily have to like you. I don't even have to like talk about any small talk or anything, but we can get along fine, and you could be my wingman, I could be your wingman, and we could have a good shift. And
Right.
I could ask Keith if he wants to go out for a beer after work and not ask Sean, and he's not going to be offended.
Right. So, Craig, do you think that might be because women in general, this is huge generalization, but they're more geared towards that sense of connection. It's more important to them, whereas men might be more task-oriented, maybe?
That's probably part of it, because I mean, when guys get together, it usually revolves around an activity.
True.
That's usually what brings people together. And again, it's like, I personally don't feel like I have to know that people like me, or even, want to invite me out for a drink or invite me over to their house. I really don't care.
Yeah.
You could ask my next door neighbor and not ask me, and it's not going to bother me at all.
Yeah.
Right.
What about you, Rob?
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Keith. It's a bit of a generalization, but I don't know. My own experience, I have noticed that there's a whole lot less drama when there's a majority of nurses that are men on the floor that day. And I've even had patients tell me that they appreciate having a male nurse, because they like that we're actually, paradoxically, they say that we're more compassionate, because we're actually trying to overcompensate and not, because they see a guy walk in with a shaved head and tattoos and a goatee. They're like,
wait a second.
Wait a minute, this guy's my nurse,
Mm-hmm.
So I'm talking in a calming voice and I'm being nice, and I'm, so they're like, yeah, we like you guys, you're not mean to me.
Yep. I've been living that contrast my entire nursing career. So
yeah, it's true. It's true.
I have blogged about it multiple times, and the bottom line is that when men have differences, if it's really as bad as it can get, quite ultimately, and this is a horrible overgeneralization, but men will go out back and beat each other silly, walk back into that same building and laugh and have fun, because they got it out of their system.
Yep.
They got it out of their system. You won, I lost, or vice versa. I won, you lost. Moving on. And then we move on. Whereas women don't know how to simply let it drag on. And that's a horrible overgeneralization. I'm probably going to get a lot of haters to come back at me for that one. And I will accept that. But in my personal experience, when two men have a problem, and I'm talking male nurses on a nursing unit, we can go out back, or we can go into the break room and scream at each other, throw things, have even broken things before. And once it's over, you walk back out on the unit and it's like nothing ever happened. When you have two women, or you have women and men who have that disagreement, that argument will last up to a year.
Right.
And that is not an exaggeration, that they'll hold. And I think, Andrew said it in the Twitter comments there, is that the grudge factor, they hold a grudge. And instead of coming at you face front, they come at you from the side, or they come at you from the back, or they recruit help to come at you from the side, or come at you from the back. And then this segues into that whole clique. It's horrible. And do I know what the answer or solution is? I absolutely don't. But I still work on it every day to try and turn it into a grudge-free zone. How's that? A grudge-free zone.
That's a good one.
I'm going to coin that phrase. Is that I try to work in a grudge-free zone. It's hard, and it takes a lot of work from both parties. But I think the hardest part is being able to take whatever fire you have in your belly and to swallow it down and talk about it.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Right.
whereas all women want to do is talk about it. Sorry, I overgeneralized again. Sorry.
Well, I think women tend to be a little more process oriented than men.
Mhm.
You know, they want to process it through that, and whereas men just want to be like, okay, we talked about it, it's over, okay, done. And I see that. I wish my wife was on the call right now, because we do that in our own relationship, where, you know, we have a disagreement and I've admitted I'm wrong or whatever, and I just want to kind of brush it under and say, okay, we're done, let's move on. But women often need to kind of, you know, talk it through a little bit more. It's an interesting, very interesting gender difference, you know, in
I
communication.
wouldn't know how that feels, Keith. Not at all.
No, I'm sure you don't.
No, not at all.
But I can.
Believe me, I know. You can't say you're sorry. I'm sorry, I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And be done with it.
Exactly. All right, so we're going to move on to one last topic of conversation, because we're already almost at the hour here. But
Okay.
this one is near and dear to my heart, so I would like to get at least some comments on this one here. Male nurse moniker, or calling yourself a Murse.
Oh man.
Yeah. So this somehow became a cool term. Uh-oh, look at that. Keith's taking off.
Oh,
He's getting prepped. Oh, it's getting real now. For those of you who are not watching the video, Keith just took off his sweatshirt. Apparently, he's a little hot under the collar right now.
Oh no, not at all.
So this also spawned from the same conversation, but this one is kind of near and dear to my heart, because I am just going to say it out loud. And I actually posted a blog post about this just a day or two ago, that I absolutely hate being called or referred to as a male nurse. And I absolutely can't stomach or say out loud the word Murse.
Mhm.
Because every time I hear, read, say the word Murse, I think of man purse.
Right.
So
Oh no.
I would like to get everyone's comment on using the term male nurse and using the term Murse, and then we'll circle back and I'll close it out with some final thoughts. So Craig, you go first.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the only person that ever referred to me as a male nurse was my father. But most of the places I've worked and everybody I've ever encountered, I've really never I don't recall hearing that term very often, and maybe from some very elderly people, but for the most part, I feel no need to really differentiate female nurse and male nurse. I mean, we were kind of a unique. What's the word I'm trying to think of? Something unique back in the day, because like when I was in nursing school, we had like 50 people in my class, and there were 5 of us in that class, so it was kind of a unique thing.
Raising my hand for those not watching the video.
Yeah, but I don't really care for the male nurse. The Murse thing, though, I've never heard anybody actually say that live in person. I've only seen it as an online thing, and usually as a kind of a tongue-in-cheek and done with a humor type of thing, usually like on YouTube or Twitter or that kind of thing. That's the only time I've ever seen the term. I've never heard anybody use the term Murse in a real-life conversation where I'm like looking at a blood and flesh individual.
Okay. Keith, how about you?
I hate the term. Totally hate the term. I mean, are female doctors calling themselves, I don't know, femme doctor? I mean, are they creating some other term? They're a physician, right? They're a doctor. And I've been called a male nurse more times than I can count in the course of my 20 years. I mean, people have introduced me. This is Keith. He's a male nurse. Or, yes, I had a male nurse. His name was Keith. Or, why are you sending me a male nurse? So I've heard it, I can't tell you how many times. And maybe it's because I've worked more in home care and hospice and in the community. Maybe that has something to do with it rather than the hospital. But I don't really feel like, I think people in this society, in this culture, are still getting used to the fact that men can be nurses, and they have to say, yes, I had a male nurse. They have to make a real big deal about it. And
But usually
I
it's done because that male nurse was awesome.
Yeah, it often is
There you
because
go.
they're awesome. Yeah, that's true. That's very true, Craig. That's a good point. But I look forward to when we don't really need to make any differentiation at all. And as far as Murse, I hope Craig is right that it's mostly tongue in cheek, but I don't know. I hope it is. There's lots of Twitter handles out there with the word Murse in them. So I'm interested to know what they think about that.
I'm curious to hear what you have to say, Rob. Seeing as you're the least seasoned nurse. Let me use that term. How's that?
Yeah.
Or did you mean Murse?
I do agree with Keith that I think it's more of just an online tongue-in-cheek thing to say Murse. Really, in the Twitter sphere, it's more just to differentiate yourself. To say, like if you say, I used to call myself cardiac Murse, because if I just said cardiac nurse, you would not necessarily know that it was a male nurse who was on that Twitter profile, especially if you're trying to be anonymous. That being said, it's really just stuck to online. But, I've never referred to myself as a male nurse. I've had patients and other nurses refer to me as a male nurse. But, I think there is some negative connotation to the word nurse, when it comes to, it's almost that connotation of you are like to breastfeeding, like you're nursing someone back to health, and men just don't like that connotation of any kind of femininity to it. So we hope for some other phrase that, is equally professional, but not so female oriented,
Interesting.
Hmm.
So it warms my heart that everybody agrees that using the term male nurse is it doesn't have a place. At least I don't believe it does. And Keith kind of stole my thunder when you talk about.
Sorry.
No. Was that at what point did we start calling physicians, female docs and male docs? Because I'm a living stereotype is that I'm the male nurse and my PCP is a female doctor. So go figure that one out.
Right.
Well, yeah, it blows my patients' minds when I walk into the room and the doctor walks into the room and I'm the nurse and she's the doctor.
Yes.
Like, wait a minute.
I would agree.
Right.
I think we sort of hinted at it, and I think Andrew and a couple people hinted at it in the Twitter chat, is that maybe the male nurse descriptor it still lives because of the elderly, because of the older population. I would tend to admit to that the older population, because quite honestly, and I talked about this in the blog post that I posted several days ago, is that the few times, and I can count them on one hand, that a patient refused to be cared for by me because of my gender, it was because they were all quite elderly, and it was just a comfort level. So, they grew up in an era that, not many nurses were male. So, and now, I think
there's a certain, sorry to interrupt you, there's a certain intimacy with nursing that people don't have a problem with having a male doctor, because the doctor's not changing your bedpan. They're not, doing things that are very intimate that nursing does. And so, while you would have no problem with having a male doctor, in most occasions, you would certainly have a problem with having a male, especially if you're a more modest elderly woman, or certain, ethnic or religious backgrounds as well. So,
a good argument, but I mean, you got to think about yearly exams. For those of us who are getting up there in age, there are certain things that we're going to have to subject ourselves to maintain certain insurances and, to make sure that certain body parts are still working at certain levels. So I would agree and disagree with you on, the intimacy factor. We definitely flirt over that line. Sorry, had to go there.
That's okay.
Trying to keep it.
You were very tender there. You didn't. You kind of kept the suspense a little bit, Sean.
Sean, you must have a ways to go before you have to cross that line.
No, not that far. Not that far. So I'm a little older. The bald head is very deceiving. So, lastly, the whole Murse name. I get upset by the Murse name, and I never thought of it the way that Rob described it, is that we're trying to find our own name to separate ourselves from the feminine undertone of the word nurse. And I guess my argument would be, if you were worried about the feminine undertone of the word nurse, then you probably should not have joined the profession altogether, would be my first argument. But is it worse to have a name like Murse that is so tongue-in-cheek that nobody takes you seriously?
I don't that the general populace that's not online has any idea that word even exists.
No, I don't know, because the first time, and I agree, and the first time I was called a Murse was by my father.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow.
And it was a joke. And I mean, he has since then apologized greatly for it.
Yeah.
When I actually took him to where I work and scared him. So
the first time I encountered the word was on Twitter.
Yeah. And I do see it a lot as Twitter handles, like Rob had mentioned. I actually have somebody saved here on the show notes who was their handle is Northern Murse, the M Murse.
Mm-hmm.
I just, in its personal feelings, I just feel that term weakens our profession in some way, and it bothers me. Maybe it's a personal issue I got to get over. Yeah, as Craig smirks and snickers.
It's a word that's probably not going away.
No, it's not. Not at all. Not at all. And if it's gonna. So I guess, so here's the argument. If it's going to draw attention to you, that attention's better than no attention.
Oh dear.
So if you're on Twitter and you're doing it for social media purposes, by all means, have at it. Yeah. So,
well, to quickly be a little tangential here, when you're talking about your father making fun of you and calling you a Murse, I was worried in the beginning when I first decided to go into nursing what friends would think. I was military, is very gung-ho male, and so to be a nurse, you're like, oh gosh, that's not a very manly thing to get into. But I was surprised at the response that I had from friends and family that were actually very positive, and I was very surprised and happy about the fact that I've never, aside from tongue in cheek, I've never actually had anybody make fun of me or be derisive about the fact that I became a nurse. It's all been respect. So,
yeah, I would agree that now that there is a wonderful paradigm shift right now because of our percentages are slowly going up. I know that I think I mentioned it on Twitter, is that when I started it was less than 6%, and now we're just on the cusp of 10% of our population. So I did some quick number crunches, and that's like 10,000 new male nurses every year over the past 10 years.
And I think the thing that you'll notice is that small percentage tends to concentrate itself into certain areas too.
Which is what we talked about, like in the acute care arena, in the higher, I can't think of a better term to use, the higher high octane flight nursing,
nurse anesthetists.
Yeah. But I mean, some of the greatest nurses that cared for friends and family of mine in long-term care, in home health care, in single-day surgery were men. So. I'm not gonna spoil anything from previous conversations with other individuals, but we are multifaceted, and we're more than just the stereotypes that we could have a whole nother conversation about. So, anyone have any final thoughts on the topics that we discussed this evening? We'll go in order here on the round table. How about you first, Craig?
That's kind of funny, yeah, because the one of the typical stereotypes that I hear female nurses, and again, that almost seems redundant to say that, but I don't know about you, but the men that work on my unit, they're typically looked at by the women as being like slobs. It's like, oh, you go in that guy's room, his room is always a mess. I don't fit that mold because I'm a tidy person. I like order, but I get it. I mean, there are a lot of guys that I follow that their rooms always look like a bomb went off, and it definitely doesn't bother me, because I know they do good care. Otherwise, their house is in order. But yeah, I mean, their house is a mess when they leave. It's like, so what?
I take care of my stuff at work better than I take care of stuff at home. So my wife will be the first to tell you that. So. Keith, any final thoughts after tonight's conversation?
Final thoughts. Let's see. I think in terms of the whole salary issue that started this whole conversation and you actually launching this particular conversation, Sean, I appreciate it. I think there definitely needs to be more study because I think Sean and Craig and Rob have been right in that there are a lot of holes in the studies and there's a lot of pieces that still need to be put in place. So we can't make any rash judgments about it. But looking at the society as a whole, I see it as an issue, gender disparity, pay disparity among women in general. So I assume it is happening to some extent in nursing, but who knows what the extent really is. And I look forward to someone really digging into it more deeply. Maybe Medscape or maybe JAMA will do it again. And in terms of the Murse thing, I think it's a dead topic because I'm not going to let it get any traction.
Thank you for joining my plight.
But I've been maybe my wife will start calling me a Murse now. But I was just going to say that in terms of being a nurse, I mean, I've been so proud of being a nurse for so long and I love it, and I love working with nurses and coaching nurses, and I think the profession has a lot of growth ahead of it, and I'm interested to see what will happen in the rest of my lifetime, which will be maybe another 30 years if I'm lucky, and I'm interested to see how things develop.
Awesome. Rob, how about you?
Awesome. Well, yes, kind of going off of what Craig and Keith were saying, I definitely think it'll be an interesting dichotomy when we have the female doctors coming in the male nurses and how that power play is going to work out. Discussing the wage issues, from what I understand, yes, 78 cents on the dollar for women versus males. In nursing, I believe it's about 90 cents for every dollar. I would like to see that broken down a little more. I wish that they had not been so more generalized to annual salaries. Maybe we're looking at the hourly salaries. So I do think that there needs to be more research on that. And but of course, I think all of us will agree that if there is a disparity, that's completely uncalled for, and that there needs to be equal pay across the board. We all do the same work. We all face the same stressors, and nobody deserves to be paid more or less for the same job. So
awesome.
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So before I forget this, and this is horrible to admit, I watched the TV show Code Black. Don't judge me.
Oh.
Don't judge me. Okay. Hollywood entertainment. Don't judge me. But I watch it for one reason only. The character that plays the male nurse in the ED is my favorite character. He played by an actor that I'm a fan of, and I wish I could remember his name right now. But the episode I just watched, he talked about, he was quoted in saying something along the lines of, "I'm never not a nurse." And that just resonates with me. And I know it's Hollywood medicine, but that resonates with me because I say that every day, is that you're never not a nurse. And I want to thank all three of you for coming on today and subjecting yourselves, first of all, to the video camera, because I know that not everybody is comfortable in front of the video. Keith and I are doing this on a regular basis because of the podcasting, and Keith is doing this a lot longer than I have. So I thank you both for subjecting yourselves to the the video and the recording. I would invite you all to come back and maybe have another conversation once Keith's blog post is released, and maybe we can have a conversation about all of the disparities and stereotypes that Keith, that I have some insider information. I know what he's talking about in this blog post, but I would love to get your take on it, as well as maybe get a couple more people coming on and actually talking about this, because we can talk about these disparities as well as the very popular stereotypes that are out there that we all know about and have experienced. So I would love for all of you to come back on and have a conversation about that.
That would be a lot of fun.
So
Thank you.
I hope that maybe this will be a more regular occurrence.
I look forward to it.
And maybe not just talk about men in nursing, but anything about nursing. So
Absolutely.
The wide variety of experiences that we have in just these 4 screens is amazing. So I thank you, gentlemen, for stepping over the line and actually becoming one of the good guys, because I think we are the unsung heroes of healthcare in general. So one final thought for you is that I had a really, really tough day at work and wanted to just come home, curl up in a ball. It was one of those days. And all of you motivated me to get my head on straight and to stay positive on what's good about our profession. So thank you for that. We're going to do a quick closing thought here, because we are recording my podcast, which I tend to forget sometimes. But once I hit the stop button on the record, you guys are more than welcome to hang out for a little bit longer. I know that, Keith, I don't know if you have time constraints or if anyone else has time constraints. You want to stick around and we'll open the forum up and maybe even let some other individuals come in here and to the video screen. So this has been the Change of Shift podcast. I am your host, Sean. This podcast is where we we solve problems, review topics, and share actionable information that encompasses the professional and personal lives of healthcare professionals and nurses. If you found any of this information exciting or fun, maybe you would subscribe, download, or listen to other episodes while we discuss current events, impactful stories, and invaluable lessons from the front line in healthcare. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me this evening. You have yourselves a great evening, and